Waters podcast, where Mainers tell their stories, unfiltered.
Welcome to the Muddy Waters podcast. I'm your host, Chuck Ellis, and the Muddy Waters podcast exists to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on here in the state of Maine by interviewing people from around the state. They may be Maine citizens or U.S. citizens. They may not in certain cases. Today, we're fortunate to have with us the head of the chair. Is it the president of the Maine College Republicans?
Chair
of the Maine College Republicans and the president of the Bowdoin Republicans, right? Is that?
Yes.
I got that. Okay. I knew there was a president in there somewhere. Zak Asplin. So thank you so much.
There's no prime minister in this one.
No prime minister.
We've kept
That's right.
as American as possible.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining, and it's been a pleasure between I think some texts and whatnot as well, phone calls, and just meeting you. I think at the Remembering Charlie Kirk event that we put on as the Cumberland County Republicans, just kind of hearing your story, and so I just felt like I wanted to get you on here so you could kind of talk a little bit about like who you are, where you come from, and what your experience has been like coming to America and finding that we hate ourselves. So, yeah.
Well put. Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on. It's been an interesting journey across the pond, but I must say I love it here. Wouldn't go back. But yeah, it's a turnaround. Why not?
What's wrong over there? I'm just kidding.
Oh,
but we can get
to that another time. There's a lot gone wrong over there in Britain. But yeah, I suppose you want to hear a little bit about maybe coming to Bowdoin. I suppose it's
yeah. I think shocking. A lot of stuff that you would have covered at the event, but then some more.
Well, I said at the event that I was in search of some First Amendment freedoms. But not necessarily just that, and that was sort of tongue-in-cheek. In truth, I'd always wanted to come to America for university. For one, you have a better university system in terms of what you can study. It's liberal arts, and so the thing is I'm indecisive, and so it was helpful that I could still study a wide breadth of things. And I was very lucky to be able to come here and get most of my sort of tuition things covered. And I must say, I think Bowdoin is an amazing school. But I came to Bowdoin and I was just like horrified by the level of sort of social far left performativism which takes place on college campuses. I mean, I'm really, really taken aback. Generally, the British sort of political spectrum is more left of center than over here, sort of the Overton window. And yet, I mean, I have seen nothing like this before. And I come to Bowdoin and just taken aback by the sort of strangely ill thought out, woke sort of mob. And that phrase is used too often, but it really does well describe what takes place on university campuses. And so I thought, this is insane, truly insane. Why is it that I'm getting taught all this awful stuff about America while I'm in America, and that America is this sort of evil progenitor of all the moral ills of the world while I'm here in America? I thought that something doesn't seem right. And all of these American students that I'd be speaking to and who are my colleagues here who, live wonderful lives as Americans, truly can't see that. Sure, they have issues. Everyone has issues, but truly can't see. I have no grasp of the perspective. Then also throw in these constant criticisms, and I thought, well, gosh, we need to change this a little bit, because I love America. I mean, I don't know what's not. No country is perfect, but you can get pretty damn close.
Well, it's so interesting. I love talking to people who are not from America who come here. Or even that don't even get here. And I talk about some of the things that are going on. And like, you're absolutely right in the sense that like, there are problems here. There are things that we need to work on, but the attitude by so many people on the left is as though this is the worst possible place in the history of the world. Like, and that we need to like literally lose sleep and be up in angst and fight people in order to make it better. And I'm reminded a little bit of like, you're familiar, I'm sure, with William Wilberforce and the work work that he did.
Mhm.
And the movie Amazing Grace, he's having a conversation with one of his compatriots who's basically saying we change the world by degrees each day, and he's like, an imperfect order is better than no order at all. And the other guy says, no, we must fight for a perfect order. And like this idea that we cannot be satisfied unless everything is perfect. And that seems to be the attitude of these American liberals. They see these problems that are like imperfect and they act as though it's the end of the world. And if you're outside of America, you recognize that America is actually like so incredibly awesome, and that people are so, to use an American term, a liberal term, privileged. And like this is one thing that they want to talk about, white privilege in America. What they should be talking about is American privilege, and like the reality that, like, for instance, I want to travel. I've discovered this with my wife. She's Rwandan, right? Her ability to get travel to different countries is it's very difficult. Me, I just like hop on a plane, I show up, they give me a visa on demand almost everywhere, other people. But anyway, so I'm derailing the conversation, but like I love talking to people from outside the country because they who have come here, they seem to have a better sense of appreciation for what we have here than people who grow up here.
I do think that's true in part, and that's not wholly true. I must say, every time I head slightly farther south or slightly higher north in Maine, at least, and south in the country, I usually find people with a far better grasp of just the amazing gifts that America has given its own citizens and the world. But it reminds me of that Michelle Obama interview when she said, "I wasn't proud of my country until they elected my husband." And this is the thing. It's I think national pride has to come first in many regards, almost in the same regard as we hold our family or our faith. It's your sort of initial bar, and from there you work on it. But you can't view it in this sort of. So many people have this sort of divorced theoretical conception of right and wrong entirely. They divorce it from how the real world works, and they say that when America doesn't live up entirely to how I conceive of that, it must be awful. I have no loyalty, etc., etc. I just think I think it's really crazy.
Yeah, no, it's again, it's like I said, it's like things are not perfect, therefore they're terrible. Like that's kind of and it's like, okay, like I used to work in banking, and I remember, this was like I think it was like 2017 or whatever, and I was working with somebody, a young woman who had come here from some country, I don't know where, and was trying to get like money to be able to go to college because she didn't have the ability to get student loans or anything like that. And I was just like, given what Americans complain about, like, do you think we're crazy? And she's like, yeah. Right. With all the options that we have, like people who come here from other parts. And this is kind of one of the other silly things about liberals, right? Is that they're like, America's terrible. That's why we need to import the poor people from other parts of the world so they can experience how great it is. It's like,
yes, I know.
I don't have like the cognitive dissonance to be able to, understand.
They really run some logical circles sometimes. You have to admire how they get themselves into these positions. But no, I do think you hit a good point, which is it's like converts to a religion are generally sometimes more appreciative or full-fledged in their practicing of it. And I think this is the other thing about America, right? It is to say it's not a nation of immigrants is wrong. It is a nation of immigrants, and always has been. But those immigrants want to, if they're the right ones, they want to be American. They want to come to America, and they want to embody what it means to be American. And they can do so, I think, wonderfully, as long as they, fully assimilate. And if so, there's some of the. It's the same, I suppose, in most countries in the world. Immigration is not a bad thing. If you have the right people in it, they'll end up being your best citizens, or some of them.
Yeah, I would agree. Like to your point, like the people who come from another place, they know what they didn't have. They now know what they do have, and again, I think that big part is that they're coming here for the American culture. They're coming here for the American way. They're coming here for what America is, and they want to assimilate and become part of it, rather than coming here and bringing like problems that came from where they used to be, if that makes sense. And they don't want to, you know, it's one of the, and I think obviously one of the things that we have to manage with immigration is the speed, and so in order so that we can be able to like adapt to, and give people time to assimilate so that they don't
Yes.
bring the other stuff with them. So those are some important elements. But absolutely, I mean, immigrants, legal immigrants, do tend to be some of our best citizens for that very reason. They're here, they know the opportunity that they have, and they're very excited about using that opportunity to make a better life for themselves and their family. Whereas I think people who grow up here sometimes are a little bit too complacent, and they don't necessarily have the drive and desire to work as hard. I think of like professional athletes, right? A lot of your professional athletes tend to come from poorer families. They get an opportunity, they work really hard. This is their only way out. And so a lot of the top athletes are ones that didn't have an easy life, and that lack of an easy life is what drove them to excel. So I think there's a parallel there. But tell us about, so tell us about what it's been like at Bowdoin in particular, and then obviously like your involvement in the college Republicans, because so you're not a U.S. citizen, therefore you're not a registered Republican, and yet, what did you find, and what have you done since you've come on over?
Yeah, well, so I came here. Obviously, there was no right of center group at Bowdoin whatsoever. I think we have a Democratic Socialist chapter, maybe something like that. Or we have an anti-capitalist reading group. That's one of the things we have. And then obviously the Democrats.
Wait, anti-capitalist reading group, isn't that every class and every discussion group?
At least in half of the departments here, yes. Yes, it most definitely is. But occasionally the students take it on themselves to teach themselves, which honestly is a rare amount of drive to find for a modern college student. So you have to appreciate that aspect.
Sure.
But yeah, I was really taken aback by it. So, and I knew that Bowdoin conservatives and Republicans had existed before. In fact, at some point it was a flourishing group. Obviously, somewhere along the lines that disappeared. And so I set a new one up because I'd always been, not always been conservative, but I would just say I've always had common sense or some degree of it. I'm sure my mother would disagree, but that's led me to being conservative per se. And so I set up this group here, and we suddenly got a really good sort of stable membership number for a very small, very liberal college. And we were getting involved in all these like political debates on campus because the year I came, 2023, we had the October 7th terror attacks in Israel. That whole hullabaloo broke out, and obviously it affected so many different college campuses, ourselves included. And so it seems like suddenly now we sort of took on the mantle of not just being a conservative and Republican group on campus, but being like the sole opposition on campus to every time that anyone needed a commentary on anything. And so, yeah, that was great fun and games. And then we became accredited with the chapter, with the statewide college Republicans, which have been on the outs per se. They're just sort of dwindling membership. And this is an issue that a lot of the New England states have faced, right? Is that the college Republican chapters kind of gave up. And sometimes even the statewide GOPs kind of give up. That's not always the case, but I think like the Massachusetts college Republicans at some point, they kind of disappeared because they just knew they had no chance. But Maine is different. Like, we actually have a shot at sort of having sanity in our leadership. We're still a purple state. And so
purple almost into light blue. We're somewhere between purple and light blue.
I was being optimistic.
Yeah.
I don't know how many more sort of, I speak as a foreigner, but I don't know how many more New Yorkers can come up from the boroughs and fill Munjoy Hill and expect us to remain purple for that much longer. And then they'll vote for exactly what it is they're escaping, which is just wonderful as well. But so then during that, I had a term under that. Then I ran for leadership of Maine College Republicans, just because I really liked what we were able to do here at Bowdoin, and I just wanted to expand it out and make sure that every single university in the state and college in the state has an accredited chapter, and we can work with the state GOP, and we can try and get good elected leaders in Maine, and also try on the student level of making some real change on the universities. The public school system is an interesting one, and the private one is another interesting one. I think the privates are slightly more crazy than the publics in Maine.
Hard to imagine, but I think you're accurate. I think that's accurate.
But it's close. I mean, they are vying for the
I think we're
Job
talking
of the
about
Year
the.
award.
I think we're talking about the differences between the different levels of infinity, right?
Like, pretty much.
So like somehow in mathematics there are infinite numbers that are infinitely greater than other infinite numbers, right? And I think that's kind of the difference that we're talking about between like the public and private schools in terms of how crazy they are. Anyway,
I think it's like comparing the intellects of, say, Senator Warren and soon to be hopefully not Senator Plattner. Let's not say that actually, but we don't want to jinx it. But it's lacking and awfully close. So that was that. And now I suppose I'm running Maine College Republicans, and it's just been amazing. I mean, what an amazing group of people that have sort of come out the woodworks when they get to college. Some have always been conservative, others sort of, I think, react to what they see, and others are just imbued with common sense. And they join in any of our different chapters, and they're just a real pleasure to work with. And we're growing at a really good rate, and we're hosting cool events at different chapters. And I don't have to take a strong leadership role in it because we have great leaders in each individual chapter too, and I want them to sort of flourish on their own. But it's just stewarding it to make sure we expand.
Yeah, well, I think that's really obviously really important for the future of the Republican Party in the state of Maine, that we have strong Republicans at all the campuses, because this is one of the unfortunately one of the tactics that the Democrats took, or the globalists really that were put behind the Democrat Party took like 50 years ago, as they took over the universities. I guess 50, 60 years ago, in the 60s in particular, they took over the universities. And slowly from there, they've been able to trickle down over time and influence every level of our infrastructure here in our country, to the point where they basically control all of the institutions. And how we take that back is partly through higher education. I think it's partly through Donald Trump, not bringing over 600,000 Chinese to be able to save these universities from failure. I say let them fail, because they're Marxist indoctrination centers anyway. And so I think there's some concern about what that ripple effect in the U.S. economy would be if they did that, which might be part of Trump's thought process behind that, but I'm not on board with it either way.
I think part of that is the whole sort of just foreign policy dimension, more that it's a helpful tool in foreign policy. But look, I'm an international student. I'm all for international students. I'm all for diversity, in the sense that I do think it's cool to get as many different people with different backgrounds of sorts, because you should, hopefully, if you're doing it right, also get diversity of perspectives and opinions. Unfortunately, that's something which the higher education system has tried to rule out, which is, I think, the biggest issue. And so, we don't need 600,000 Chinese students coming over, and the amount of Indian students we have coming over. It's the same thing can be said with H-1B visas, right? H-1B visas are necessary. Frankly, I think President Trump was on that interview with Laura Ingraham the other day, and he said
he got roasted over it,
torn apart for it. But I'll give a defense of it, and they can tear me. Which is, if South Korea is investing $10 billion in a facility over here, making what has always been South Korean tech, but they're finally doing it in America. And of course, they're going to, hire the majority of American workers, but they're going to need the South Korean managers and things like that they've always had. This is just common sense. And also, I think, we can expand to, if there are the smartest people from all across the world, we do want their talent. This isn't rocket science. it seemed actually it is
Well,
safe to say rocket
I,
science.
I think part of it was people got offended at the idea that Trump said that we didn't have the people here in America that were smart enough and skilled enough. I think that it was partly it was our people aren't smart enough. What do you mean? And it was more that like it's really more about the skill. So like I'll use an example.
Yeah.
My brother works for a company, and I won't necessarily name them all, but that makes shoes, right? Or boots, I should say, here in the state of Maine. And when that company started, and they found like whatever the machinery you had to start making boots, and they found they bought an old machine, and then in order to be able to figure out how to use that, there was this one really old guy in his 80s that still knew how to use that machine, and they had him train them. So there is a legit, and what's crazy about that is one of the biggest things that Maine used to export was shoes. Like before, before NAFTA, and this is where all these people who just grew up without pre-NAFTA, I get tired of people roasting Trump over tariffs. I think we need to bring tariffs back aggressively. I think it's idiotic to have a trade deficit. It's destructive to our economy, and anybody who doesn't think that is not paying attention. Is the short version. But like Maine's one of the huge elements of Maine's economy, and a place where people without college educations were able to get good jobs were in our mills, which disappeared, and then also in the shoe factories, whatever you want to call those. But so that's the thing, is it used to be something that we had, and like so many people doing this type of thing here in the state, and it got to the point where we had like one or two really old people in the state that even knew how to do it, and since then I think the person that trained them has passed, but the company was able to get up and running. But the reality is that knowledge and understanding to be able to do that type of thing is something that we are lacking. We don't have that skill and that understanding, and so like yes, like the vast majority of people.
These type of places. I mean, this is the thing. It's not that Americans aren't smart enough to do it. Of course they are.
Right.
But it's just that the higher education sort of industry, and it is an industry in America, has massively failed at producing it. I mean, like you take the kids from Harvard, right? I mean, you might have seen the recent things going on at Harvard with their report, which said something like 70% of all grades given out are A's. Well, sorry, but the students that went to Harvard, that are going to Harvard now, that are all getting A's, are not magically smarter than the students 30 years ago at Harvard who were getting, the gentleman's C, and that was your average grade. And there's still the same distribution. But this is the issue, is a lot of higher education has given up. It's not teaching the right skill set. It's not teaching the right work ethic. It's, we look at the AI stuff, right? This is cutting edge changes that need to be made. In the world, and they will be made in the world. We want to be at the forefront of that, clearly. So you need to get people who are going to the cutting edge schools, and some of those are in America, yes. Unfortunately, some also aren't. What I do have an issue with the H-1B visas is the fact they're all going to China and India, and they're all either sending money back home, or there's certainly a lot going on which is very questionable within how the H-1B visas do operate, and how they get sort of like, and the student visas operate, and how they get massively in proportion to India and China, and the rest of the world is sort of like left out. And I think that a lot of the world that are sort of allies or traditional allies would be better off, getting people from there than China or India.
Yeah, I think no matter where people are coming from, is unless they're coming from certain segments of Europe, they're going to be sending money back home. I just think that's no matter. So I think that's like a moot point. But I do think that, like, when you look at, there are some abuses for sure with the H-1B visa. I remember I delved into this a lot when Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who largely disappeared from the Trump administration around this time, and kind of lost his seat somehow. Unfortunately, I really like Vivek. In the Doge conversation, but they were both getting roasted over their that they're being proponents of H-1B visas, and neither one of them were necessarily arguing for like the abuses. They were arguing for the reason that it was created, right? Not for the abuses. And there are these like big tech companies who bring over people when they could hire Americans. They bring over other people, pay them substantially less amounts of money, have them over here for a short period of time so they don't have to offer benefits. And basically they make bank on this, and that is an abuse, and that should be shut down. But we definitely do need some people from outside the country. And I mean, especially like we need to fix our education system, right? And not just the higher education system, but every aspect of our education, because we're not preparing kids. And so like, and even if we do that, right, when do we see the fruits from that? We're talking like 10 to 15 years, right? And so at the very least in the interim, when these organizations are getting started, like Trump was talking about, they're going to need to bring people over in order to be able to get things up and running. But also like until we can actually fix our education system and be producing people who have the skills and abilities, knowledge, experience, expertise, problem solving skills to be able to accomplish those tasks, we really kind of have to do that. So
and this is the thing too, is I mean, even pre H1B, America's always tried to attract the greatest talent, because most of the time that greatest talent is also smart enough to realize that America is the best place to be. It's a place where you can flourish. It's a place and so they become Americans. That's always a wonderful thing. I mean, I am worried about wage suppression by foreign labor, but that's not on the 100,000 people coming on H1Bs. That's from the 4.5 million illegal immigrants more that are let in illegally through the southern border and who do really suppress wages of lower income Americans. I mean, that's rapid fully just outlaw it. And I think you've got to crack down on the H1B system and be stricter on it, definitely. But shutting it down is a ridiculous idea, because we want that talent to become American. We want them to want to be American, to get American citizenship, etc. Just as I think the British government should want to do the same there, and the Italian. I mean, we should be vying to be the winners of the world always.
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting. I'm going to probably get myself in trouble, but I don't care. It's kind of interesting to me that like part of the argument, I think, of not wanting like the best and the brightest to come here is to give an opportunity to the people who are here. And I do think, let's be very clear, that a nation, their first and foremost, its obligation is to serve its citizens. Always. At the same time, it kind of feels like, hey, if the best person to do the job, and we want to bring really high quality talent, we want to make sure we have the best of the best in the world. And we say, no, we're not going to bring you over here, even though you're the best of the best, because we want to give it to an American citizen. Feels a little bit like the DEI type of thing.
A little bit of affirmative action-y.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like that. I mean, again, like we need it's again, first and foremost, as a general rule, a government should be creating opportunities for its citizens first and foremost. But when we're talking about like the best of the best and needing to make sure that we have the best of the best here, I don't think we should deny them in order that like certain American citizens can have jobs that maybe they're not the most qualified for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's just about striking a careful balance for it. If you have someone who wants to come to America and set up a business which employs 50 people and employs 50 Americans, that person who's coming over is not necessarily American, wants to become one. I mean, that's an amazing thing. That's the type of thing we should be welcoming. I just think that we should be, and this is where the administration has been right, with the F1 visas, the students, and with the H1Bs. You want to make sure those people want to become American. You've got to make sure they are aligned fully with American values. Otherwise, they should not be here. I mean, there are so many international students, right, who I know who hate America. Why are you here? Go away. I'm here because I love it. And I'm here because I'm here seemingly because it has produced the best environment for me to thrive by my measure and metric. So that's why I came. So I just think we need better screening. We should be screening social media profiles. We should be screening these things before people come here. I fully believe that.
Yeah, 100%. We need to bring people here who actually care about our country and want to participate and don't hate us. I think bringing people here that hate us so that they can send money back home, so that that doesn't
make
add
much
up. That
sense.
it does not make much sense unless we're trying to disrupt our country. But so one of the other things. So as what are some challenges that you've faced from the administration or in other different ways as
Sure.
you've kind of started up the college Republicans? Is it technically the college Republicans or is it
We're the college Republicans and Conservatives.
and okay.
Yeah, because we're the officially accredited Republican group here. But at the same time, this is the other thing is I don't want to be so, and I mean, I'm like hard ideologically right, pretty much party line on like 99% of things. But at the same time, that is not how you're going to appeal to people who have never been exposed to other viewpoints before. Not once. I mean, you have to do some middle ground, an attempt at appealing. So I also included the conservatives in there at the trying, because there are people who would consider themselves conservatives who might not be a Republican yet, or might have a sort of more conservative disposition than others, and haven't like fully fleshed it out into their politics yet. And I don't think we should be turning those people away by any means. Certainly not in the university system, maybe elsewhere, but here we've got to at least we're taking the steps that we can.
Let's be very clear. At every level in Maine, we need to be open, in my opinion, open to that. I'll allow. We could deny anyone at our Cumberland County Republican Committee meetings, for instance. We could deny anyone who's not a Republican the ability to attend the meeting, and we are going to screen people, I think, to a degree if they're coming and we know they're not Republicans. But like I think, how do we grow our movement if we don't allow people who are not yet fully on our team to come to our events, right? And be involved, and hopefully by doing that we can befriend them and make connections, and hopefully bring them over to our side. But especially here in the state of Maine, where so many people are registered unenrolled or independent is what they call themselves, right? Many of them are actually like just more conservative than some of our Republicans. They just don't give full allegiance to the Maine GOP, for instance, and the Republican Party, because they feel like whether it was under the Bush administration they were burned or something else, or they feel unsupported by the Maine GOP. Unfortunately,
and also, these people have lives. I mean, for you and I, sure, we have lives, but we're also geeks at this sort of stuff. Like, we like it too much almost in many ways. I mean, most people just have a job to go to, they have families to look after. They do not want this constantly in that, and sure, they might consider enrolling, but they're fed up, and I don't blame them for it. I think everyone should have some political knowledge. I think that's important. But,
in a democracy, when our vote determines how the laws are turned out, yes, we should be at least somewhat aware.
And we should be, promoting this sort of Tocquevillian style of local democracy. But it's not necessarily so many Americans and Mainers' fault that they're not interested in that. It was taken off of them, that sort of local town hall democracy, by the state level government and by the federal government and its reckless expansion. And so, I can see why people aren't devoted to their local politics and things like that. And it's understandable. I would like to see more registered Republicans, yes. I would like to see more people involved in politics, yes. But, we have to be reasonable here. And I think that's why we want to have as open tent as possible. But coming back to your question, we didn't really have any issues necessarily from the administration. I mean, because a lot of people in the administration of Bowdoin realized how bad it had gotten. I mean, truly how awful it's gotten. The other issue, though, is that it's a minority that has realized how bad it's gotten. The rest of them see their job as an extension of their politics. We might as well Bowdoin's administration, and also when hiring faculty, might as well just go straight into the DNC party headquarters and start picking people out. And it's the same can be said at Bates and Colby. And this is a real issue, is these people don't even consider that conservative perspectives need to be heard, should be heard. They think they're dangerous, but they also just think they're stupid, which is ironic because when you hear the things they say, you lose a few brain cells in the process. But it's the main issue we've sort of encountered wasn't, the administration was trying to block us or this or other things like that, but just that so many of the faculty here, a couple of the administrators, and the vast majority of the students are so politically left that they are so hostile to opposing views, which is why we had the cancellation of the Charlie Kirk vigil because of the threats that the event faced. We didn't cancel it, but Bone Security basically went ahead and said this has to be cancelled because of how bad the threats were. That was from students. That's a crazy thing at a school of 2,000 people, which advertises how it has the Bodin Hello on the quad, and everyone's lovely, and everyone serves the common good, and we all sing Kumbaya around the campfire. That's not the case, because they only sing Kumbaya with people who agree with them. That's the main issue we've encountered.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. It's like, again, this is the Democrat Party at large, but it's obviously playing out to an extreme measure. I think in the university system, which is we want diversity of everything except for thought.
Yes, yeah, truly.
What are the main issues I think that you think are driving people that people are, we'll call it the most ideologically captured on, that they think that, that I guess that there's because there are certain areas I think where a lot of us can agree, right? Like, so for instance, like whether you're a socialist or a capitalist, you can agree. I don't think there's a lot of people that are like, I think Google, Microsoft, Apple, Netflix, Meta, Nvidia, I think they should be bigger and they should have more power and control over us. Like, I don't see anybody saying that, right? So there are areas where now the solution on how you fix that is different. Like, conservatives say deregulate most of the industry and it will create more competition.
Sure.
And then these companies won't have as much power and control. Democrats, socialists, or whatever, these crazy communists will say that we need to take over and we need to regulate so that people can't do stuff, which actually regulation is what's caused these companies to get bigger and bigger and bigger, because the regulation has hurt their competition more than it's hurt them, and they've been able to get a corner on the market. But that's a whole nother story. But at least there's an area where we can come together and say, hey, these major corporations and the way in which they're controlling people's lives is concerning. But what are the main issues where we can't find common ground with college Democrats?
I've been thinking about this more and more, and I'm going to sound like a Debbie Downer. In fact, I'm going to sound really miserable. I think that the vast majority of people in the middle, and some on the extreme left, some are fundamentally good people. I mean, truly, I'm not, Hobbesian in terms of, I do think people are generally good. I do think we have a sort of shared objective morality, whether these people are relativists or not. We kind of all do have a roughly objective morality. Some of us. And I think it was more of us at one point. I would say it was like 98% of people on the political spectrum. Now, I don't know, 70. And some of them are very hard extreme people I know. So I know communists, right, who are here at Bowdoin, and they call themselves communists. And they're communists because they're deeply empathetic people. They really are. And however it expresses itself politically, they're good people and they have good intentions. But, there is more and more and more of these kids, especially on the left, and people on the left, who they are fundamentally not good people. They really don't even have the basic moral agreement anymore with them. These are people who do think that it is completely fine to kill babies, and have no restrictions on abortion whatsoever, and they don't even recognize that abortion. There's the middle ground, which is like abortion is a moral evil, but it's necessary. Some people take that view, but these people it's not even a moral evil. These people just, seriously, we have zero moral agreement with some of them on, and I think it's because most of them are driven by envy and jealousy. And there's this great Thomas Sowell quote which said that envy used to be a sin, and now people are charading it as empathy, and it's not. It's envy. People are envious of others, jealous and hateful, and a lot of them, I think, there's a lot of them that are young people, really disillusioned young people, and that they take this sort of hard left stance. But there is a portion of the extreme left who I actually get on so well with, because we do have shared moral principles. We just express them in different ways. But there are, I think it's a growing amount which honestly there's no agreement with, because the basic fundamental morals are just completely out of line.
Yeah, no, I believe that. I think one of the statistics I use, because it's always fun to use, but is the one that JD Vance used when he was covering the Charlie Kirk show in the wake of Charlie's assassination, where he shared that according to recent surveys, 23% of Democrats believe that political violence is acceptable. 3% of Republicans believe that, is what he was saying, and that number is still too high. But it's 23% of Democrats, and so it's like the people who fall into that category are clearly so, like, again, you talk about a different moral compass. We do not have the same set of morals, they believe violence is acceptable if it attends, and like, let's be clear, there are situations where I'm a Christian, right? There are segments of the Bible where God is talking about going to war and giving victory to kings and different things like that. I'm not saying there are no situations in which I hate using the word violence, because the way in which it's used is, it's like, there's something about the way in which liberals and these socialists. Somebody was trying to give me a hard time at our Charlie Kirk vigil that we did in Portland 2 days after he was assassinated, and about like he claimed, because I really like the movie V for Vendetta, and we were talking about some aspects of that, and he's like, so one of your favorite movies is about political violence, and I'm like, yeah, but I think you're misunderstanding the point here. Like, you should watch the movie and understand that the point isn't about political violence. It is an action movie that's actually about corrupt government and the way in which it oppresses people. And that's actually the point. And so, but like, anyway, I'm not saying there aren't situations like there. I think the term that the Bible uses, that I think I would quote, and I can't remember the exact where it is off the top of my head, but it's so much as it depends on you. Be at peace with all people. I mean, we should never, or I guess, to quote Thor from the movie Thor, a good king should never seek out war, but should always be ready for it, or whatever.
Yeah,
right.
Something.
And I think,
look, it was to me the difference between when Trump said fight, 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 but we weren't the people using political violence. Is the difference,
right?
Have a fighting attitude, stand completely firm in what you believe. I mean, I think there's too many Christians who take the sort of Jesus was meek and mild, and that was all he was argument. No, Jesus was strong, very, very strong. Because to stand firm in the sense that in indescribable pain, to be able to stand, to be able to be on the ninth hour bleeding out on the cross, pleading out, and still to forgive, that is strength. Complete strength, but then it's a difference between action and, I think, temperament. And there was too many conservatives and too many Christians who said, well, we'll just be meek and mild like Jesus, but we won't stand for anything anymore. We'll bend over because that's the right thing to do, and that's political weakness, and it leads to sort of political violence, because weakness always does. Instead, I think sure, it's necessary to be strong, but there's a complete difference between that and the type of moral, just sort of lack of moral clarity that so many on the left have. if something could happen to a Democrat or a Republican, and you could acknowledge how awful it is, how disgusting it is. One example would be Nick Fuentes.
Mhm.
I think that man is a disgusting human being. Period.
Mhm.
And when he says something of that ilk, of whatever he says, similar in a way that Jay Jones says it, and who is now our wonderful Attorney General of Virginia, when he threatened the kids of one of his political opponents,
Oh,
and threatened
yeah.
their life. Yeah, I mean, it's wrong in all counts, but the issue is Republicans, most of them, I think, can see that, and too many Democrats are unable to express that when it's that way, and it's the fault of ideology. I mean, it's ideology over humanity. It's ideology over prudence. And I think that the job of living as a citizen in like overly polarized times is to be able to say, look, I have to be able to get on with other people who disagree with me, etc., etc. I have to be able to sort of strike that path, and that leads to sort of prudence and good decisions and bipartisanship and things, these buzzwords that actually are good. But too many, especially young people in the academy and in higher education like this, are so ideological that it's all or nothing. It's, as you said earlier, if America doesn't, if it's not perfect, I hate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I would agree about Fuentes. By the way, just for the record, I had a conversation with somebody about him recently on the podcast, and talking about his interview with Tucker. I'm still a fan of Tucker, and I think people who call him an anti-Semite are not listening to what Tucker is saying personally. I feel like I have to say that. I can't not say that. I've delved into it, and I've gone pretty deep, and I think that I think that's what I see. I don't expect everybody to agree with me. I don't agree with Tucker on all the aspects of this, but Fuentes is very dangerous and frightening, but like to your point, like the more he's come into the mainstream, and he's not really in the mainstream, he's just in the spotlight at the moment.
Yeah.
Which again, part of what I'll say is he's been growing and gathering strength in the darkness. And
Sure.
Tucker brought him into the light, and now we see the problem, and now we can address the problem. That's my official position.
I
and that's
do partly agree with that.
Yeah.
Completely.
And so, because I think a lot of people didn't know who he was and didn't realize so many people, especially young men, are gravitating to this guy. And so, as a result of him coming into the light, I think that's going to be addressed, and the right is addressing it. I mean, we're like, people are talking about a right-wing civil war over this because of how aggressive we feel about anti-Semitism, how aggressive we feel about racism in general. It's bad. I mean, Tucker starts off the conversation even by saying, racism is a sin and it's against my Christian values. Like, that's how the conversation starts. That's where we stand. We're against racism. We're against anti-Semitism. And Fuentes is just I think he's a grifter. I think he's a guy who's trying to gain influence for the sake of himself, not for the sake of other people or our nation. It's all about him elevating himself, which is inherent in the way in which he goes after people who disagree, who critique him, and decides that he's going to attack them, and anybody. So he's we can move on from that, but yeah, what I would like to know is, like, where are you finding hope with people in the middle, with people on the left? Are you finding any common ground, any ability to like have conversation with people who are not? Again, you've got the people that are so ideologically captured by leftist ideology that there's really no hope until their system of thought is destroyed. Until we win, we'll call it the culture war, and destroy them and show them that America wants no part of what they're offering. Until that happens, and maybe even then, they're not gonna back down. Right now, with Mamdani winning, they're really high. They're not gonna, they're not gonna be discouraged. But with people who are not so far that way, but just really have left-leaning ideology because they've been brought up throughout all of our institutions, including the banking industry that I worked in and other corporations. It's basically like you have Republicans who are being political and Democrats who are right. right? And so they've been brought up with this idea, like leftist ideology is just the truth, right? This is what many people grow up thinking. They don't realize the reality of the situation. So I'm hopeful that maybe there's some hope that you're finding in conversations with people who fall into that category.
Yeah, I mean, look, as I said, there's always a portion of like they usually have blue hair. They're usually not very well dressed. You can tell them apart. They usually have a septum piercing as well, and those ones don't even start. It's not worth it. But there is, with a great deal of people, I think the vast majority, there is enough hope because it's a core thing is we do have a shared moral, like objective morality. Humans tend to have that, I think, and there's a lot of areas where we can make serious, like bipartisan headway on. I think there are a lot of, say, professors here at Bowdoin who would never have voted for a Republican in their life, but who will appreciate that there is a lack of political diversity here and it's become a real issue. Or if I focus on like one specific example, there are professors here who are old school Democrats who actually their politics doesn't matter. They're just old school professors who grade as professors should be grading, like evaluatively, where they actually judge you on their work and they actually bother to mark your work. And they see the complete lack of standards everywhere else, and they realize that it's wrong. And this is an area where, in the academy, for instance, in higher education, we have that agreement, and we can push for it, and we can fight for it on those, say, two areas. That's a big deal. There's two of the biggest issues facing higher education, and so I think it's possible. I think there's a lot of hope. I think, let me say, in the case of Bowdoin, there are areas where we don't have hope. And I know this is the same with Bates and Colby, which is, after the whole BLM thing, like the great hoax of BLM, and that sort of like weird 2020 period, there was this hiring spree of just like entirely affirmative action hires who are awful teachers and truly awful teachers, know nothing about anything, and are entirely ideological. They're usually in the sort of grievance studies departments.
Grievance study, is that a real department?
That's what I call them, at least, because it's just
yeah,
yapping on about their grievances. But then they're not real departments. Believe me, they are most definitely unreal. But they have a lot of funding, and they hired all these new people and expanded. And this is in every university in the country. And those people are about to come up for tenure. The question, once you get tenure in an academic institution, you're set. The question is, how can we make sure they don't get it? Because one, they don't live up to the type of academic rigorous standards that institutions like this need to be upholding. And two, they see their job entirely as indoctrination. And you should have, I think, even as Republicans, if you're a professor, you should be curious. That's your job, is to be curious about the world. You shouldn't have settled conclusions on every single issue. You should be curious. These people are not curious. They are ideologues. They have every answer written out for them, in whatever sort of weird cultural outcrop they're reading now, whether it be The Guardian or Vice News or Handmaid's Tale or whatever it is they read in their spare time and watch RuPaul's Drag Race, and they get these opinions, and they are solid in them. And you can't be an educator. You can't be in a place of learning and not want to learn anymore. And that's the issue. Is we have too many of those type of people in the academy now. How can we get rid of them? It's going to take alumni actually stepping up, and it's mainly going to take alumni and students stepping up and saying, these faculty have to go, these administrators have to go, do not ruin my college anymore. It already costs an arm and a leg.
Well, I can only imagine though, like if they don't if they tenure these people, and if they don't return to standards, at some point people are going to stop deciding to pay the amount of money that it costs to go to these universities, and they're going to be done. It's like at some point the economic environment is going to say it's too expensive. We're not going to pony up the dough if there's nothing coming from it. Like the like most of the reason people come to these types of colleges and universities is because of the business networking that they can do for their future jobs and careers. But these people aren't going to be hireable if they're like, exactly. That's not going to, you're going to go and you're going to get this really overpriced education, and then not be able to like get a job in it. You're not going to make the connections. And like, it's one thing when you go to a University of Maine at Farmington, like I did, and you spend whatever it is there, probably $20,000 a year now, something like that. Maybe more. I don't know. It's been a while since I've been there. And you get out and you've got $100,000 that you spent on your education. We'll say, it's another thing when you're paying like $80,000 a year or whatever the heck it is, 100,000. I don't know. 90. Yeah. When you're paying that, and if you're not going to get a return on your investment from that, but just Marxist indoctrination, like people are just not going to pay for it. So they need to figure that. Yeah.
Yeah. You're paying for two things. I mean, the most important one, and it sounds like not a very educational thing to say. The most important one is the alumni network. That's what you're paying for access to. And the second thing you're paying to is an education. And if you're trying to go to, say, a liberal arts school like Bowdoin, you want the education that created like Longfellow or Nathaniel Hawthorne or Franklin Pierce or my boss, who is a guy called Larry Lindsay, who was the director of National Economic Council in the Bush administration, or we have some amazing alum out there. Stan Druckenmiller, the hedge fund billionaire. You want the liberal arts education, which teaches you Homer, which goes through all of the classics, all of the greats, which does in many ways ask you to consider serious questions of why am I on this earth? What is good? What is bad? That is an amazing education to have. And that's why you're paying for that sort of 4 years secluded in the Bowdoin Pines of Maine. And that's a beautiful, beautiful idea. And it used to happen and be real. It's not really anymore, just because we don't teach that anymore. We have some professors that do, but it's a minimum. But that first thing you're paying for, which is the alumni network, those people aren't going to be around forever. And now, if you used to be producing 5 investment bankers and leaders and successful people for every 10 in the elite schools, and now you're producing 7 out of 10 are sort of environmental consultants and homeless shelter volunteers, or I don't know, they're DEI consultants, or for other places in the academy,
or they're
nothing about.
Or they're just not capable because your education standards have dropped, right? Like those alumni connections are like they have reputations that they have to manage, right? And they're So,
but do you remember when there was the whole Harvard scandal, and so many companies said, "We're not hiring from Harvard anymore," and they said this isn't just because of the scandal. They said it's because the kids here have HR complaints every 2 days. They can't get along with any of their colleagues. They work the lightest hours of the work week. They complain. They don't turn things in time. I mean, okay, I also don't turn that thing in time, but I'm a college student right now. It's part of the college experience, and so I'm equally guilty of that, I suppose. But
well, I mean, you're partly you can't change that you're a product of the system, right? Like you can be the highest moral character person that you want, but if you're able to get away with something, human nature, you are, and it affects everyone.
Excuse. I think I might use that more often.
Yeah. Well, now I'm going to hold you to a higher standard. And just kidding.
That's the point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And these people are unemployable now. They really are unemployable. And unlikable, deeply unlikable, and deeply antisocial. This is, I think, the biggest lie of the left, especially in the education. Is they hold themselves as sort of pursuing the common good, as the great believers in empathy, and those wanting to put the world to right and help other people. they are the most miserable, awful people to get along with. I mean, they really are horrible. So many of them. They're just driven by vindictiveness. They're not particularly fun to hang out with, and they're not nice to those around them in their local communities either. Um, and I think
Yeah.
that sort of self-regulation is important.
Well, it's interesting because I think if you look at like old liberals, generally speaking, when they're not talking about politics, I think they're nice, and they're nice enough people. I think there are some really great people, but I think these young liberals, I think they're just complete, like they're just angry. And I don't think that, I would agree that they're not very pleasant to be around, especially when you get into politics, and especially if you don't agree. Then it's this, why are you such an evil, horrible human being? And it's like, I'm not. I just don't agree
I'm not perfect, but
yeah.
no, I agree. Though I will say
Yeah.
this, I will say that it's not entirely their fault. I mean, I'm here bashing them, but like, I somewhat understand. We do live in weird times. Okay, so I'm born in 2005. So we grew up in a sort of post-financial crisis world with social media, with 24/7 basically doom and gloom on the news, and with the main key institutions that people used to feel some community in already being gone before we came on the stage. People aren't as religious as they were. And I don't care what religion. I mean, I'm a Christian, but I don't care what it is. It's a form of community as well as being your deep spiritual guidance. People don't have that. And so many of these young people come onto the stage as well in a time where like half of marriages end in divorce, where, I do understand then, and then you come to a place like Bowden, you've got these ideas already, and they're only getting further affirmed. And so I can see why I can see why young people are angry. And then especially ones who are about to trying to get on the housing system. And we do live in this sort of odd period of time in capitalism where actually things aren't going as they should be. Right. I'm a capitalist through and through. And it's mainly because I think we've failed at capitalism.
100%.
But I can understand why young people who can't get on the housing market, who have pretty piss poor salaries, and now have more socialist inclinations.
I would agree. First of all, somebody commented on, said perhaps the best thing Bowden has to offer is the food, and they said that you're an inspiration. So
I agree on the food. The dining workers here are the most wonderful people on planet Earth, and the food is truly amazing.
Yeah,
it was one of the reasons I applied.
Oh, nice. Well, so it is. I would agree that like capitalism is. So America still has the best opportunity, I think, of any other country in the world, right? In terms of like economic opportunity, ability to rise from the ashes, so to speak, to being super successful because of the economic environment that exists here, because of the freedoms that exist, et cetera, et cetera. That being said, there is, from an economic standpoint, by and large, at scale, we should say, there are some challenges that exist, and I think I want to go back to what I was highlighting earlier, and it's an area where we can come to agreement and say, hey, there's some problems in how much power and influence a few major corporations have, and how this kind of gets at what my brother, I think was the first time I heard this, was crony capitalism, which or some people have called late stage capitalism. These are like pessimists and skeptics that basically suggest this is just what capitalism does, and it's like if it's done poorly, but I think a big part of it, right, is that these corporations have. So let's rewind really quickly and say I'm not against lobbyists and lobbying. I think, for instance, I'll talk about the construction industry. The average construction worker does not have, because of the way the stuff that they do and the things that they understand, they do not necessarily have the knowledge and expertise to be able to go and present before legislators in the way in which an organization that is a professional that can represent them, understand their needs, and present those collectively. That being said, the corporations like your Microsoft, Apple, Google, Netflix, Meta, try to name as many of them as I can, NVIDIA, that they have to be able to exercise influence so that they get away with buying up their competition, Meta buying, or Meta is what it's called now, but Facebook buying Instagram and WhatsApp, which are effectively their competition, their social media apps and technology, that like them buying them gives them a bit of a corner on the market, which is, I mean, Facebook itself at the time was already a problem being, and then these other competition arose, and what did they do? They bought them, and somehow regulatory allowed that type of thing to go through. And either way, what this type of stuff has done, these antitrust laws that we have in place, has created an environment where it's made it easier for major corporations to get ahead and made it more challenging for small businesses. This was most significantly observable during COVID, when the lockdown policies here in the state of Maine were small businesses, Maine-based businesses that are mom and pop stores and stuff like that. You're closed. Walmart is open. Hannaford is open. And you know, smaller grocery stores, I think, were also open. But the point is, like, you had these major corporations that were able to be open, and your smaller businesses were not, and they had to figure out how they could adapt, or they failed. And a lot of them ended up failing either immediately or in the aftermath. Like, they had the PPP loans and things that we did to help these small businesses, which helped them get by for a little while. But, you know, they most of them did not have the ability to keep up. And most people adapted and adjusted to buying stuff online who hadn't already done that. And now, you know, your smaller businesses, I love Rennie's, Martin's and stuff like that. And I'm not, they have online presences, but they can't compete online compared to like Walmart, you know, and so like them being closed was very detrimental to their business and their business model, and really hurt them over against Walmart's. And so these companies, you know, these types of behaviors, and again, this COVID just highlighted a problem that was already happening in our society. And we need to figure out how we're going to address that. BlackRock and its influence in buying up housing and things like that, and also pushing policies on businesses that they invest in. These are issues that need to be addressed that nobody is really addressing, unfortunately. Even as much as I appreciate the Trump administration, this is not something that's getting addressed, you know, right now. And it needs to be addressed.
I would caveat it ever so slightly though, which is like, yes, these big companies sometimes have antitrust practices which are really harmful, but we've also got to a point where like the American consumer likes that, to the point where
you're not wrong.
And I think this is actually, I think the blame has to go to the state again, which is, you know, we changed the definition of capitalism, which was, we effectively got rid of the self-interest, which is our key, like the reason that capitalism works. You go to sort of basic laissez-faire principle of reciprocity, and sort of your own self-interest being the reason why we can all then work towards this thing. Well, that's self-interest as Americans, you know, and so a state should be making policy which is based off their country's self-interest. And this is why I love the tariffs so much, is, you know, the economics profession, and this is remarkable to me, is you read a textbook like Samuelson's, you know, the traditional Keynesian economic textbook. It's all talking about, you know, what is best for the international economy, what is best for the international produce of goods and labor, of goods and services, what is best for international labor. It doesn't come from the economy is upstream of politics in so many ways of how economists view themselves, and it should be downstream of it. We need this sort of Hamiltonian concept of the typical Hamilton concept of the economy is coming under and as a distinctly political tool for the state, for the nation state, and for Americans. And so, I wonder, you outshore all your business, you have these sort of international politics. You look at the world, I suppose, like it is a chessboard, an economic chessboard, and they say that they value things through this sort of comparative advantage Ricardian scale, where they look at their characters on the board and they sacrifice their pawn and this pawn and this pawn and this pawn. But you can't do that as a country, because that pawn is an entire community of, say, mill workers, or that pawn is an entire community in the Rust Belt. And we're actually oftentimes misinterpreting the value between a pawn and, say, a bishop, and we're putting, say, our lawyers as bishops, when actually it's the other way around, because a country, and this is what's not taught in Economics 101, is so often forgot about by policymakers themselves, needs steel industry, it needs a shipbuilding industry, it needs a milling industry. And we forgot about all of these key fundamentals, so we misappraise those two characters on the chessboard, sacrifice the ones that we actually needed, in this sort of game of international trade, and I think that's been the biggest issue. Is then it's changed Americans' persona so much too, and this is the one point I ever agree with Marx on, is the commodity fetish. I think if we can bring back onshoring, and people can look to their town over and say, well, I know that there is made by my neighbor who works in that, then you start to appreciate the value and price of something. Then suddenly the extra, 5% for a product which is made in America does mean more to you than buying whatever crappily made thing comes from China or Thailand or Vietnam or wherever it's from. And so bringing back that onshoring, I think, will start to bring back that sort of community appreciation for smaller local and medium-sized businesses, and even large ones, but a distinctly American large ones. And so I think it lies mainly in the hand of the state, which is we need those policies.
Yeah, I'm not against big businesses. Big businesses that are successful and do bring a lot of value and people buy their stuff. I'm not opposed to that. I am opposed to the way in which I think these organizations manipulate through buying up politicians to create policies that are bad for America and good for them, right? Because that's what a lot of our American companies have been more focused on, growing overseas. And that's why they've pushed for these tariffs, and it's been harmful to the United States, pushed against tariffs, I should say, been harmful to the United States economy, but helpful to these wealthy few. But yeah, absolutely. I'm happy. Build a good business, grow it. Absolutely. Make a lot of money. I love it. That's awesome. Great job. Just the government needs to make sure that you're not doing that at the expense of the American people. And that's where, as you said, appropriate government and governing and from the state, and by that I think we mean the federal government. You used the words the state earlier, but that's what you mean.
Yeah, I mean the federal government.
The federal government. We have confusions here in America because we have states and the state. Anyway, we have to clarify.
Although I would never suggest that Janet Mills is brought up by big business in the state of Maine. Never, or that Angus King did as governor. Would never ever go as far as to suggest that.
That's good. That's good. You can't say too many true things at once. But anyway, yeah, obviously those two. Anyway, the governor situation that we've had. 16 out of the last 24 years has not been positive, and it probably goes back further than that. I just don't remember back before Angus King was governor, whoever it was before that. People talk about this. Oh, it was Baldacci, I think, before that. I think that's who it was. But either way, my memory doesn't necessarily
King
go
is
back
only going to be 86 at the end of his Senate race. He's young and bright.
I know. God,
same with Janet.
Yeah, well, she's not getting one. We're hoping, so we're really hoping. Collins. I mean, Collins won by 8.6%. She's got some resistance within the Republicans and conservatives in Maine, because they think that she doesn't represent their values, and I would agree. Like, in a sense, like I am more conservative than Janet Collins, than Susan Collins. I'm more anyway. I'm more conservative than Susan Collins on a number of issues. I disagree with her. I have always appreciated the fact that she stands on her principles. She does what she says she's going to do, and she's very consistent. When you look at things over a period of time, when it comes to issues, she is very consistent. But she does have people.
And we shouldn't be as ideological as those on the far left who say
Correct.
It's Mamdani or nothing, it's Platner or nothing. No, look, we have to realize we have the one elected Republican in New England at the federal level.
That's exactly right.
Right?
Yeah.
And we need to turn out to vote for Senator Collins. I mean, I won't, obviously, I'm not a citizen, but I will be encouraging everyone to turn out and vote for Senator Collins because, I mean, the fact of the matter is simply that she is, and this sounds like a downer point, she's the only Republican that will win a statewide office in Maine, I think, now.
Well,
right
we're hoping we'll do better. I mean, the Democrats have done such a poor job when it comes to the economy here in the state of Maine that the hope is we can pick up the governor's race. But the only one that I'm like very confident in is that Susan Collins should win re-election. Right? We do need people to get out to vote against her. I think one of the things that actually is going to help her is that the Democrats have decided they're either going to go with an extreme leftist in Mamdani, or they're going to go with, Janet Mills. Either one of those will make sure that your strong Republicans show up to vote for Collins. Even they're going to bite the bullet, and that's my hope. If you're out there, please prove me right.
I hope so.
Because we need to win that race. There is a question, real quick. We'll do this and then we'll probably wrap up. But if you want to, there's a question for you, Zach. I think it's what are your thoughts on the Federal Reserve or fiat currencies in general? If you want to,
sure,
we can pass on that too if you want.
This is like what I do. Thankfully, I work for an economic consultancy firm. So this is actually what we do, a macroeconomic consultancy firm. I think, look, it's important to, everyone says the line of, it's important to me that the Fed is independent. It is important for monetary policy that the Fed is independent because you're right. If you're running a fiat currency, you're effectively running kind of a Ponzi scheme. You just have to run it better than the other guys. I'm not saying that we need to change away from a fiat currency, but it's simply that we need to keep it up, the Ponzi scheme, and do it successfully. And the Federal Reserve has failed miserably at this. If you are going to have a fiat dollar and you're going to claim Federal Reserve independence, you cannot then have a Federal Reserve which, for the first time in its 111-year history, cuts 50 basis points before the election to try and benefit Kamala Harris. That the Federal Reserve has already given up on its independence. And it's Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, wrote this wonderful article that it's had this gain of function monetary policy. And it's true. I mean, the old line, which is that printing money produces inflation. Always. It does. And the fact of the matter is the Fed should not have and should not have got to the point where it had, I think, $9 trillion on its balance sheet. That is truly insane and serious economic mismanagement. And what it's done, it comes back to this point that we made about young people not being able to get on the market, is it's pushed up this wealth effect, which has been really harmful for the type of opportunity economy we want, which is where people can actually have the opportunity to climb up from nothing. The Fed has been arguably the biggest and most responsible entity for making that worse. And it's, it's got 800 PhD staff economists. They don't do a very good job at all because there's just so much groupthink. They all think the same way, and you look at their ratings in the summary of economic projections where they project for each year. And I think it tells you everything is they constantly underscore what Republicans end up achieving in GDP growth and in inflation, or overscore in inflation even. But they constantly do that, and they don't do it with Democratic presidencies. And why? It's because they're all taught by the same individuals at the same professors in the same big schools, which say that, supply side policies don't matter, tax cuts don't matter. What matters instead is just how much money you spend, how much money the government spends. And so you get these, these summary of economic projections, which say things like, or end up predicting things like Biden's massive inflation is going to be good for the economy. And accordingly, these people actually believe it, so that they cut or they don't cut at the wrong time. I really think the Fed has a lot to answer for. And it needs to be streamlined, it needs to be better managed, it needs intellectual diversity, most importantly. And I think it needs to give back on some of the powers it has. I mean, you should not be the lender of last resort for banks and also the regulator of banks. There's a conflict of interest there, and we saw it with the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. They are getting very close to putting the American economy and just your average American mortgage holder in really dangerous water because of their policies.
Yeah, I know that the bank that I used to work for was dealing with some challenges and cut really cut a lot of their, like, setting themselves to the bone in a lot of ways. I think because they had bought back when the rates were low. They had bought too many like longer term, not long term, but like longer term bonds, which put them into a difficult financial position. They weathered the storm, obviously, and it wasn't to a degree where anybody should have been concerned, because the vast majority of the people that banked with them were FDIC insured, so there wasn't a concern about a run on people's money or anything like that. However, the Federal Reserve created that. They signaled that rates are going to stay low for 4 years, right? And then they said, I remember when obviously inflation was obviously starting. So I worked in banking 15 years. Economics is my thing, and I do want to get back to the Federal Reserve in a second, but anybody who knows anything about economics knew that when the CARES Act was passed, that inflation was coming like a storm, right? And then later on, you had the HEROES Act. And so the idea that a year and a half later, when inflation was starting to hit, was starting to be realized, because I think a lot of the companies bit the bullet initially, but when it was starting to be realized to the consumer, Jerome Powell was trying to say, "Oh, this is just supply chain disruption." It's like,
or it's just transitory. I think was the phrase.
You're a liar. That is a flat out bald face lie. You knew if you didn't know it was coming, and you really believed the words that you were saying, you're incompetent and have no business being in the position that you're in.
I think it's incompetence.
You think he's that incompetent? Do you think he's that incompetent?
I seriously think we have such a groupthink issue at the Fed that they seriously believe that the inflation was going to be transitory. And if so, they should not be Federal Reserve governors.
Yeah.
And that's the issue, is they are, because most of them great goods of the economic, and we saw it with tariffs. Right. What did the great and good of the economics profession say immediately after tariffs? And how have they had like egg on their face since completely? And it is because they're all taught by the same people, which all trace back to the same intellectual lineage of neo-Keynesians. And it's a serious issue at the Fed, but also in other areas of policymaking.
Well, there's so many other areas in our country where it's like fantasy land. It's like, well, the experts say. It's like, I'm sorry, a boy is a boy and a girl is a girl. I don't care what the experts say. You can bring in whatever idiot doctor that you want, the same ones that were probably same type of people who were telling you cigarettes were going to make you healthy and are good for your health 50 years ago, 80 years ago, whenever the heck that was. Don't forget that happened. Don't forget all these other things that happened that the doctors said were a good idea. But like, there's so many areas in our society where people are just like living and they're like, well, the experts said it, so it must be true. And it's like, first of all, that's a logical fallacy. We call it appeal to authority, and we should not be like living in obeying people who are following logical fallacies that are just so clearly not true. But anyway, that's just another problem. But yeah, I have a hard time believing that I think maybe I can't believe Powell. I believe he knew what he was doing. Maybe some of the other people I could believe bought into it, and they really are that incompetent and don't know what they're doing. I think he knows what he's doing. That's my personal opinion, having watched him over the past, however long he's been the Fed chair, which is probably over 8 years. I think he was 2018. Yeah. Okay.
2018.
That's what so about almost 8 years. So, and he's danced like a politician. So I think I'm pretty confident that he knew what he was doing. I do think what's really interesting, and I wonder if the question was coming from this, is there's so many people in our society today in America, especially the libertarian ilk, that really, I don't know if ilk is a negative thing. That's not meant that way, by the way. A lot of times it's used you and your ilk, and that's not what I mean. But people who are libertarians tend to have, I disagree with them on this, by the way, but they tend to want to end the Fed. That's their response. We just need to abolish the Fed. And I just think that, like, from a practical standpoint, even if we wanted to get there, like, we would have to really slowly and carefully unwind over the course of the next 100 years. Like, it's so ingrained. They have the amount of money, the control they have over the monetary situation in our country. It's not something that can be easily unwound. We can just turn off the Fed. It's like, yeah, it just doesn't work that way. Even if we wanted to.
And the other thing is too, we can't, like, I mean, a lot of it came from the sort of fiat currency position as well. We can't go back to the gold standard. It's not possible.
Right.
And for one, we don't have enough gold. We'd have
they still haven't audited Fort Knox yet, have they?
We don't know. Who knows? In fact, famously, when the Labour Party left government in Britain, the Conservative Party came in. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, the equivalent of the Treasury Secretary, wrote a note saying something along the lines of, "We've run out of money, good luck," and wrote it to his successor from the other party. I'm sure when you open the vaults of Fort Knox, there's just a little note saying, "We've run out of money, good luck." But
I feel like it's going to be like what's the Dumb and Dumber movie where you're going to have a bunch of IOUs.
just filling the whole hall. Just all in paper form too, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But yeah, you can't get rid of the Fed. It just needs serious reform. Because if anything, it is useful to have an independent or quasi-independent central bank, at least. As long as its independence isn't also ideology. And in the case that we're currently seeing, its independence is ideology, and it's distinctly in opposition, maybe not currently because of some of the current changes, but certainly during aspects of the Trump's first term, distinct opposition to the current government. You know, no matter how much you have sort of separate branches of government, and they should be working, not necessarily symbiotically, they should all want the same intentions and goals to some extent. And if you have a Federal Reserve which is really opposed to the government's discretionary fiscal policy, I think that's really worrying. And these people, you brought up the trust the experts line, they really are not doing a very good job. I mean, the inflation rate that we saw was frankly very poor, and that it was allowed to get to that rate. But I mean, I say look at their summary of economic projections again. This was really remarkable. They were off by over 50% than if you just took the average 2% and just took. So if you just took the average, their prediction was off by over that, which means that they actually had a negative, added negative productivity. You could have just taken the long run average and just slapped that down as that's my predicted growth, that's my predicted inflation, and you'd have done a better job than they did. And that means that they've had all of those PhD staff economists contributed to negative productivity in how they're forecasting the economy. I don't trust them then to run it.
Right. Yeah, no, this is, again, this is what leads me to, it's when we talk about national, and this is, we'll go back to, when it's like, are they incompetent or do they know what they're doing? I tend to lean toward they know what they're doing, because it's like with the politicians in Washington and even here in Augusta, if they're doing this on accident, they're really good at making really bad. It's just too, there's too much of what's the worst thing that you could possibly do, and they find a way to do it. When you do that over and over and over again, and there's a pattern, I begin to suspect that you're doing it on purpose. Otherwise, you're just really unlucky.
Certainly I mean, there's no doubt that cutting the rate in September before the election last year was nothing more than a brazen attempt at basically trying to benefit Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as they went into the election. It was clearly that. And so I understand why Trump is really angry at the Fed. I completely and totally understand it. And it needs to. It also is an awful regulator, so it needs some. I mean, the reforms have to be serious.
They do, yeah. And I actually, like, one of the things I appreciated, I will say, actually, about I think one of the problems that the Federal Reserve has done is it's taken away the incentive for people to save by keeping rates so low for such a long period of time. That this is an area where I disagree with Trump. I understand his economic policy, but even back in his first administration, when he wanted rates to be brought down and he was mad that Powell was raising them, I was like, no, this is good. Like, long term, we can't have a zero interest rate environment. It's bad for the long term economic health of our society and of our borrowers. Like, if people are making unwise decisions because debt is cheap and there's no profit in holding cash, then that's going to lead to more problems down the road. And so I actually appreciated when Powell pushed back and wasn't willing to be, to give in entirely to what Trump wanted back then. Again, it needs to be independent. And that's one area where initially I thought Powell was actually right to kind of resist complying with Trump. I do understand that Trump has, he wants to deliver and he wants things to look good so that he can, like any politician, I think Trump is pretty honest in general about what he thinks he wants to do. But I also think that he wants to show I had these successes. And I think Powell got in the way of that to some degree. But I don't think it was, in that case, it doesn't seem to me that it was malicious. I do think the 50 basis point rate cut right before the election was intentional and malicious. But all right, we've probably taken up too much of your time. I know that you probably have homework that you've got to get to be able to keep up with your
essays before Thanksgiving.
Heavy workload. Yeah, right before Thanksgiving.
And
so thank you so much.
My second ever American Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's very exciting.
It's a wonderful holiday.
Yeah. So we'll have to have you back on again to talk about what's going on in Britain and why you're focused on staying here. I think some people are already aware, but it's good to hear from somebody from the ground and who has some knowledge and experience being there rather than just from news stories. So we'll love to have you back on at some point in the future. But thank you so much for kind of revitalizing in a lot of ways the college Republicans here in the state of Maine and the things that you're doing over there at Bowdoin and sticking up for conservative values in a space where I know it's very hostile. Just thank you, man.
No, thank you for having me, Chuck, and thank you for everything you do.
All right. Well, I try to do what I can. All right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, look for the shorts and be sure to find those and share those. That's probably the best value for most people is to take some of those shorts and share those with friends and family. So people can have a better sense of what's going on in our world. So we'll see you all back here next week.